Good morning, and we're looking at Jonah chapter 1 again today, and I'm going to read verses 1 to 16. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, and we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you?" He answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." This terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he'd already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. And they cried to the Lord, "O Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, O Lord, have done as you pleased." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. When bad things happen, we normally wonder why God has allowed them to happen. And sometimes those bad things happen as a result of our own rebellion against God. Often not. The story of Job makes that clear. But sometimes there is a relationship between our rebellion and the storms that we face in life. What the heart of chapter 1 of Jonah teaches us is that in the storms, we often meet God's grace. Jonah is a believer, a prophet, a Hebrew, an Israelite. He's someone who is to point people to God, but he needs to learn the lesson the writer of Proverbs teaches us. Chapter 9, verse 10, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Fear is mentioned several times from verse 4 through to verse 16. It would be good to look at where it occurs. Jonah has heard the word of the Lord to go to Nineveh and speak against it, because its wickedness was such that the Lord is going to judge the city. Go east to Nineveh, Jonah is told. But he goes west, wanting to head to Tarshish on a ship. He's got no intention of going to Nineveh and giving wicked Gentiles a chance for God to be gracious to them if they repent. He wants them to be judged. But he can't run from the Lord's presence. The Lord hurls a great wind on the sea, and a storm arose that was clearly supernatural. The seasoned sailors fear the storm. So they cry out to their gods. They hurl the cargo into the sea, either as an offering or to lighten the boat. And while they are doing all they can to preserve the ship, Jonah is sleeping a deep sleep. And the captain finds him and cries out, "How can you sleep when the ship is in danger of breaking up?" In verse 2, the Lord had said to Jonah, "Arise, go and call out against it." The captain says, "Arise and call on your God." This is the God Jonah is running from. Now he has to call on him. How humbling. The sailors cast lots, and it falls to Jonah. He's the one responsible for the storm. So the sailors interrogate him. "Who are you?" And he replies, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship Actually, the word is fear. Literally, it's fear, this same word fear that occurs elsewhere in the chapter. I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land, and by implication brought this storm on them. And this brings great fear on the sailors. The God who created the sea and the land is behind this storm. When Jonah tells them to throw him in the water, at first they seem to refuse. They row as hard as they can to get to land, but they can't make it. So they cry out to the Lord for forgiveness for what they're about to do to Jonah. And as soon as he's thrown overboard, the sea grows calm. There are so many lessons in these verses. You have the ungodly Jonah compared to the morally superior sailors. You have the witness to the Gentiles, which is the very thing that Jonah was trying to escape from. You have the substitutionary offering of Jonah to assuage the right anger of God. But look at verse 16. Jonah's been thrown overboard, the sea grows calm, and at this the men greatly feared the Lord. And they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. The sailors have moved from fearing the storm, verse 5, to greatly fearing the God of Jonah, verse 10, to now greatly fearing the Lord, Yahweh. They use the covenant name for God. Jonah says that he fears the Lord in verse 9, but his so-called fear leads to him running from God. The sailors greatly fear the Lord in verse 16, and it leads them to offer a sacrifice to him after they've been saved and making vows to him. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. The sailors showed genuine fear of the Lord, in contrast to Jonah. God's grace is shown to the pagan sailors even in the storm, which is a result of the disobedience of a stubborn prophet. Amazing sovereign grace that saved a wretch like me. That hymn written by John Newton, converted in another storm. Amazing grace from a sovereign God who can use all sorts of circumstances. And if you've come to know that grace, the grace of the Lord, then fear him.